Ten years ago, 1 million children were exposed to fallout from Chernobyl. A time bomb was planted in a generation. But till now, science and the nuclear industry have denied any damage to their health.
The Chernobyl accident was, right from the outset, a political issue. Of course, it was the accident that could never happen. I mean, a meltdown, you calculated the risk of it, but you always said that it could never happen, and it did happen.
I would support atomic power. I believe that we need atomic power stations. But if nuclear power is going to be successful, it has to be successful in a climate of openness about its effects, not in a climate which tries to conceal the possible ill effects.
When the reactor blew, it released radioactivity 300 times greater than from the Hiroshima bomb. 30 firemen and cleanup workers died within weeks. But as the fallout spread across Europe, millions of ordinary people were also exposed. Worse hit were the people of the tiny Republic of Belarus, just north of Chernobyl. Their country became a giant laboratory, the people unwitting guinea pigs in an unplanned experiment. For the effects were unknown.
I want to make a, how to say, the cheer?
Toast.
Toast. Toast, cheer, toast. Okay, for one person who is the engine of this work and everything, it's Dr. Baverstock. Thank you.
Working on. You know, there was an explosion.
A British scientist, Keith Baverstock, was to play a key role in convincing the world of the need for urgent investigation. He worked closely with local scientists who were struggling to cope with the aftermath of Chernobyl and a legacy of Soviet secrecy.
I see.
And it was never officially announced.
А когда случилась авария, мы в этот день аварии находились в деревне у родителей. Это 20 километров от Чернобыльской аварии. Вот этой. Помогали родителям садить картошку. Дети были маленькие еще. Саше было 1,5 годика, а Ире 3. Солнце было, жара была, потому что мы еще раздевались, чтобы загорать. Я знаю это. А дети были постоянно на улице. Постоянно. Каждый божий день были на улице.
Военные ездили, мыли дома. Детей в садики возят, ведут, они дома мыли. И никто об этом конкретно ничего не сказал. Крыши по домах меняли, ездили. Кто-то что-то знал, но никто ничего не говорил.
For years, people were told nothing. Belarus seethed with rumor of children with leukemia, of babies born deformed. But Chernobyl was deemed a military secret. Science and the West were kept out. As Chernobyl became the focus for mass protest, Gorbachev at last sought help from experts in the West.
It had to be somebody who was credible, I think, with the Soviets as well as with the rest of the world, and probably I think they saw United States as a group who would bring out something if it was likely to be there.
Mettler was hand-picked by the International Atomic Energy Agency. They commissioned a health report.
I think they figured that I would be a person who would give them a reasonably honest answer and a lot of work.
Mettler's team found ill health was rife, but could it be linked to the accident? After a year checking thousands of people, they published their results. Their massive report concluded there were no health effects. They could find no evidence of diseases linked to fallout, only psychological stress. The IAEA gave Chernobyl a clean bill of health.
В ту пору было рано начинать говорить об влиянии радиации на здоровье населения, поскольку прошло еще только несколько лет. В связи с этим возникла такая ситуация, что многие ученые в мире, многие люди в мире восприняли этот отчет как полное отсутствие опасности, в том числе и в нашей стране.
But disturbing reports were already coming out of Belarus. Problems were surfacing in the rural communities. They were appearing in children who'd been living near the plant. The cases were turning up during routine checks at school. Yevgenia's doctors noticed he had an enlarged thyroid, but it wasn't taken seriously.
Мне так уверили, что не очень ничего страшного, и я на повторную уже проверку сама его не повезла. Это мне надо было где-то через месяцев 3, вони сказали его привезти на проверку, я его не повезла. Хозяйство, дети, знаете, не придала особого значения этому, думала, может так.
A year later, Yevgenia went for another routine check.
Повезли їх обратно на проверку, и мне уже там сказали вообще, что его аденома. И я все время ждала. Вы знаете, его оперировали, наверное, демо часов 2, может даже и больше. Это очень долго, а для меня это стяглося вообще, то я, здається, цілу вічно ждала. І мене був з собою білий халат, я думала, може якраз все-таки ж дитя під наркозом. Думаю, може якраз пустять. Ну тут оказалось так, що нікого не було, я на себе одела білий халат і зайшла в палату. Это не пересказать словами. Это, знаете, яке ощущение, это вообще я там чуть ли не навзрід плакала. Дитя ж під наркозом. Білий, такий страшний, що стіна. Пржитво. Страшно.
Yevgenia was not the only case.
До Чернобыльской аварии в Беларуси за 20 лет был обнаружен рак щитовидной железы только у 20 детей. Теперь встань, пожалуйста. Поэтому для нас, конечно, была большая новость, потому что сразу резко возросло число больных. Ну и не только в этом новость. Оказалось, что рак обладает высоко агрессивными свойствами. Боишься? Боишься?
Так.
Ну вот сейчас будет клиническая конференция, будем разбирать и будем назначать на операцию. Пожми руку.
By 1992, more than 60 cases of this rare cancer had been reported, most in Belarus. At this point, Keith Baverstock became a key player in the unfolding drama, with 2 distinguished colleagues. Professor Sir Dilwyn Williams of Cambridge University and Professor Aldo Pinquera are world experts on thyroid cancer.
Okay, right. What I have to do...
To the other side of the road.
Baverstock works for the World Health Organization. He arranged a conference and invited Belarus doctors to talk to a disbelieving world.
We were sitting in the bar the evening before the meeting, and I have to say the skepticism was pretty incredible. I mean, people were really making their minds up before the meeting and saying, well, this is absolute nonsense, and it was really quite remarkable to me.
It was argued that the claims of health effects that had already been presented by Soviet scientists were too fanciful to accept.
They created around them an atmosphere of incredulity. Therefore, when the scientists from the same countries and with names that sometimes you confuse in your mind because they have a similar pronunciation, present some data. Probably they are very good scientists and the data is very good, but the incredulity of the past is there.
But Baverstock thought the claims should be investigated. He organized a visit to Belarus with Williams and Pinkera to see the evidence.
I would like to show you some our patients which has the diagnosis of thyroid cancer. First girl is Marina Svirskaya. She is 9 years old and she was operated 1.5 years ago. We saw some changes in lymph nodes and regional lymph nodes, and this girl is under the examination of oncologist. The next patient is Nadezhda Glad. She is 12 years old. The next patient is Irina Starovoitova. The next patient is Tatiana Dvorak. The next patient is Yelena Trushko. She is 10 years old. You can see that she is rather small girl. She's a good girl. She has a course of treatment in our clinic too.
We were really quite staggered because just on the first day of our visit, we visited Professor Dmitrik's clinic, and he produced 11 children who had just had operations for thyroid cancer. And I remember Professor Pinkera saying, well, I don't think you could go anywhere in Europe and find that number, let alone in one room.
We actually saw patients. We examined the necks of the children. We saw the distraught mothers. We saw x-rays of tumors that had spread to the lungs. I was shown a specimen from an autopsy that had been carried out on one child who had died. And I saw about 20 or 30 tumors that had been resected surgically over the last 2 years. I get sent many cases for my opinion on the diagnosis, and it is most unusual to get one from a child. So to see 20 or 30 together was remarkable, and then I realized that there really had to be something serious occurring in those who'd been exposed to Chernobyl.
But industry skeptics refused to believe that doctors were finding something new.
Before Chernobyl, in all that area, there was probably not any single endocrinologist in these villages. Probably they were not aware even that the thyroid existed. After the accident, all endocrinologists in the Soviet Union were sent to that area. And of course they started to detect the sickness of thyroid. That was their specialty.
Doctors and scientists, and this included the Minister of Health in Belarus, Minister Kazakov, were feeling frustrated that they were faced with what they regarded as a very real problem in seeing unprecedented numbers of children with thyroid cancer. And the reaction in the West was one of disbelief by many people. And if not disbelief, of saying, well, we will look into this without any impression of urgency.
Baverstock and his colleagues helped Belarus doctors write a letter to Nature, adding one of their own to support the findings. The letters triggered a controversy that would go on for years.
I certainly had one comment, but not directly from industry, from a major international, or from an official in a major international organization, saying that he thought it was quite wrong that we should have publicized that something was happening before we had absolute concrete proof, and that it created a feeling of panic among the community.
Generally, they were simply saying that these results were fabricated, that maybe there was one cancer. I mean, they couldn't deny the fact that there were internationally confirmed diagnoses on more than 100 cases. But they said, well, maybe this is just one case, but it's been sliced up in different ways and attributed to different people, and multiplying up the cases in this way, which I think was without any justification whatsoever, and rather unpleasant.
Others argued that the cancers were being found simply because doctors were looking for them. Because of the accident, they were going in with sophisticated screening equipment to look for cancer, and they were finding it. Fred Mettler calls it harvesting.
There are analyses done in the U.S. of populations where they said, let's go look for thyroid cancer. And they found it 20 times more than they would have expected just by harvesting cases that might have been there in the population all in 1 year.
But this couldn't explain the Belarus findings.
The majority of the cases, certainly in the early part of this increase, came to light not because they were found by specific screening programs, but through the normal routes of the parents finding a lump in the neck, or the children being found to have a lump in the neck during a regular school examination.
As the arguments continued, Keith Baverstock became a crusader, fighting to convince the West and to bring help to local scientists. He persuaded WHO to set up an international thyroid project based in Minsk to investigate the cancers. Most of our information about radiation is based on the bomb. Some survivors did develop thyroid cancer, but not for 20 years. That's what was expected after Chernobyl. But there were too many cancers too soon, so their link with radiation wasn't believed. Chernobyl was different. In Japan, most people got a single massive dose of external radiation. After Chernobyl, millions were exposed to internal radiation from fallout. They breathed it in, they swallowed it with their food. No one could predict the effects. There were new lessons to be learned from these survivors.
Well, if you look at the geographical distribution, I think that's very important. You see these cases lying under the track of the initial passage of the cloud. That is in the very early hours after the accident, and perhaps for the first day, the cloud was traversing across the northern part of the Ukraine and southern part of Belarus. And that's where we're seeing the cancers. And we are seeing higher incidence rates the closer you get to the site of the accident.
There's one obvious culprit. The thyroid gland absorbs any iodine which gets into the bloodstream. It needs it to make hormones for growth. Radioactive iodine was spewed out of Chernobyl in enormous quantities.
Because the thyroid is such a small tissue, this concentrates nearly all the iodine that comes into the body into this one tissue and gives a very high dose. Doses here in the Gomel region of 1 gray were not uncommon, and the dose from natural background radiation to the thyroid of a child living here before the accident would have been about 1/1000th of that each year.
This village is now a hotspot for thyroid cancer.
Что в этот день было? Обычный день, как все дни. Никто не знал. Ну, сказали, что взрыв произошел. А что ты взрыв себе представлял? Все работали. Кто где, кто на поле, кто в огороде работал. Никто не представлял собой, что что-то опасно. Но потом уже стали уже говорить, что это опасно для здоровья, что, мол, это очень вредно, особенно детям.
Her son Valera has thyroid cancer. radioiodine seems a likely cause. But critics point out a snag in this theory. Iodine-131 has been used for decades in medicine, with not a single case of thyroid cancer resulting. But it's never been used to treat children, and a child's thyroid gland is growing. Cells are most vulnerable to radiation when they're dividing. A radiation hit may alter a gene, and when the cell divides, more mutations can occur as the chromosomes copy themselves. Damage to the genes may eventually trigger cancer.
I myself would be perfectly happy to receive radioiodine if I developed thyrotoxicosis, but I am not happy for a normal, extremely young child to be exposed to radioactive iodine.
Iodine was pumping out of the reactor for over a week. The distribution of cases suggested more. Hotspots of cancer lie in areas first hit by the plume. Baverstock believes the problem was aggravated by something only present in fallout in the early stages. Short-lived iodine isotopes are more active than iodine-131. They may have combined to make a lethal cocktail. The cloud from Chernobyl would have reached here just before dawn, loaded with short-lived iodine. It was hot, and the children slept with their windows open. They could have received a critical dose before they even woke.
There is some evidence that there was an early morning mist. This would have increased the exposure even more because the iodine would have dissolved into the droplets of water and the droplets would immediately be retained in the lung, and therefore the isotopes would get into the bloodstream very much more efficiently.
Country people would have been especially vulnerable to short-lived iodine. Most drink milk from their own cows.
If you had to wait the 3 to 4 days that you would for milk produced through a dairy, the short-lived isotopes would have decayed mainly. Where you had your own cow, or where you collected the water off the roof of your house to drink it, then that you consumed in the first 2 days could have been heavily contaminated with the short-lived isotopes of iodine.
There could have been some protection for the children. In an accident, stable iodine can be taken. It's absorbed by the thyroid and stops radioiodine getting in. But it needs to be taken before exposure. Supplies were available, but Mayday intervened. 4 days after the accident, people were on the streets for the annual Mayday parades, unaware of the iodine raining down. Politicians waited until after the parades to sound the alarm. Stable iodine tablets were distributed. Too late.
I recall being at a scientific meeting and talking to some of my colleagues, but overhearing a conversation going on next to me when really quite outrageous claims of falsification of results and things were being made. And I afterwards went up to the person that was saying these things and I said to him, what really would convince you that this was real? And he said, well, seeing the children with the scars.
Я переживала, но я не так уж и не боялась этой операции. Потому что даже врач мой лечащий сказал, что эта операция на щитовидку, это как сейчас для всего этого мира, это как грипп или насморк.
By 1995, there were 400 cases. Irina had a lump removed from her throat on her 13th birthday.
Медсестры приходили, поздравляли меня с днем рождения, Желаем им всего успехов, чтобы все было хорошо. Ну, я надеюсь, что это будет так же, как они мне пожелали.
Мам, скажешь, когда сюда? А нас уже снимают?
Сейчас, вот когда она лежала, опять ей положили 1 сентября в больницу, она после операции лежала еще 17 дней. Там что-то обнаружили на правой стороне, я не знаю. Ну, сказали, что это вроде бы уплотнение какое-то, и надо находиться под наблюдением. Врачи тоже боятся, чтобы не пошли метастазы на правую сторону. Нам, конечно, это страшно. Я не знаю, как будет дальше.
Though numbers were soaring, the IAEA's report had become the Bible. It was used by critics to cast doubt on the findings. Yet evidence did exist, in America. To the astonishment of Williams and Baverstock, Fred Mettler now reveals he had found thyroid cancers as far back as 1990, though his report stated there was none.
The first thing we did was try and track down the actual pathological slides to see if they really were thyroid cancers that they were looking at. Thyroid cancer pathology is very tough pathology to do for anybody, and we wanted to make sure that they at least were getting the diagnosis right. And the Ukrainians actually gave me slides from about 20 patients, which we brought back to the U.S., and we did confirm that they were essentially all thyroid cancers. So it was clear to us at that point that something was happening.
I'm surprised because that was not included in the paper. And I would have thought if that had been done, it should have been included in the paper because it would have given us advance warning that something was happening and had given us maybe a year's more notice to try to set up proper studies and proper assistance.
Resistance to the idea was strongest in America. The US government has special reason to be wary.
Scientists are discovering how potentially dangerous waste gases from an atomic plant can best be prevented from contaminating nearby population centers.
In the 50s, the Department of Energy deliberately released a cloud of iodine-131 to test how well they could track a plume.
The distribution and density of the smoke
It added to other contamination from weapons tests.
and reported.
We are at 2-8.
There is now evidence that quite large areas of the states have had a low-level exposure to radioactive iodine. So naturally the government is very concerned and doesn't wish to be put into the position of saying it may be that we caused these thyroid cancers and it may be we'll have to pay compensation. I suspect, although I have no direct proof, I suspect that there was a US government view which, to be charitable, was certainly hoping that radioiodine would not be shown to be the cause of thyroid cancer.
Williams believes that vested interests in the West have distorted the issue of the Chernobyl thyroid cancers. Fear of crippling compensation claims, entrenched views of scientists, industry worries about bad PR have all obscured investigation.
I would like to call Dr. Baverstock. He will present his paper on thyroid cancer in populations exposed to radioactive fallout.
But in November 1995, radiation experts from around the world gathered in Geneva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At the heart of the debate, the Chernobyl thyroid cancers. And leading it were Williams and Baverstock.
And you can see that there's an uncertainty of a factor 5.
For them, the conference was a high point. Scientific opinion was at last turning.
It was, and we don't really know what it was, or that the risk factor is higher, i.e. these isotopes are more effective than X-rays.
I would have no hesitation whatsoever in myself or any of my adult relatives swallowing a large dose of radioiodine to treat Graves' disease, but I would certainly not allow a young child of mine who didn't have Graves' disease to be exposed to radioiodine. The pathobiological difference is such, I think it's wrong to make that connection.
Yeah, you'll like that very much. It'll be helpful as Minister of Agriculture.
With over 500 confirmed cases, sheer weight of numbers has forced most skeptics to take it seriously, though there are still pockets of resistance.
is playing too much to the side of the one-third.
My personal judgment is that these cases that are appearing are probably attributable to radiation from the accident. That I believe that many of my colleagues share my opinion, but not all. I have to say, not all. There is not unanimity on this. But there is a very big difference between gut feelings, even professional judgment, and real data. We don't have a complete set of real data to make a judgment without any doubt.
What I would really like to see ultimately out of this is a map of where the iodine went, how much there was, and that these increases that are being reported really were in places that the iodine was. And that would tie it all together and prove it in my mind. What you'd really like to know is that the people who got this cancer, in fact, got the iodine. But as of 1992, I don't believe that there was a single one of those cases that anybody had actually measured the thyroid gland of any of those people to see that there was iodine in it. And until you have some better data, it's best to just collect the real data and then talk about it instead of speculating.
We're scientists, but we're also responsible to the public as public health people. And there comes a time when you have to cast aside your scientific doubts and say that this causation of thyroid cancer by the isotopes of iodine is sufficiently strong for us to take the appropriate public health action. We don't need absolute proof. We didn't get the help to these people that were needed because this argument was going on, because this increase was not accepted or its association with the accident wasn't accepted, or because people were simply arguing about this rather than actually getting on with doing something about it. As a result, it's quite possible that lives will be lost.
While the scientists argued, doctors in Belarus have had to cope with the rising toll of victims. Help from the West could have improved prospects for these patients. Treatment here is different from the West.
В самом городе? Да. Сколько тебе лет?
15.
Скажи мне, пожалуйста, кто у тебя обнаружил здесь узелочек щитовидной железы? Кто?
Это в Пинске обнаружили.
Ну, кто? Врач?
Врач.
Ты сама пошла туда?
Да.
Ты сначала, наверное, сама обнаружила.
Нет.
А кто?
У нас просто знакомые меня по направлению отправили.
In the UK, surgeons would remove the whole gland to prevent secondaries. But Dmitchik removes only part. He says it improves their chances.
После операции нужно всю жизнь, если удалять всю щитовидную железу, нужно всю жизнь принимать вот этот препарат. Какую роль сыграет он сам, если принимать всю жизнь, еще неизвестно. Это синтетический препарат.
But cost is also a factor. A month's supply of thyroxine, on which they would depend, costs just $5 or $6, a big drain on the tiny health budget. The surgeons opt for partial removal and risk secondaries. Belarus doctors face more unknowns. Medical teams make regular trips from Minsk to screen children exposed to fallout. The question is, how will this epidemic of thyroid cancer develop? Will numbers level out, or will they continue to rise?
Один человек пошел к окулисту, другой к невропатологу, третий к педиатру. Но вы должны всех абсолютно обойти. Всех. Вот здесь птичками у вас написано все врачи, которых вы...
This class of 11-year-olds is the group carrying the highest risk. For research already shows that in an accident, the most vulnerable group is the very young, babies in the womb and children under 3. William says their risk of developing thyroid cancer at some time in their lives is 700 times more than normal. It could become the commonest cancer in Belarus. A time bomb has been planted in this generation. They will need screening twice a year for life.
People would rather now forget that the Chernobyl accident had happened. Unfortunately, the effects of radiation will go on for decades. These problems will be here, new ones will occur, and it's going to require a continuing effort, and certainly not enough is being done.
So far, thyroid cancer is the only effect linked to the accident. But this boy is being checked for internal doses of another contaminant, radioactive cesium. This was the first ever cesium accident. Its effects are unknown. When the reactor exploded, it blew cesium across large areas of northern Europe. Much of it fell on Belarus. The assumption was that cesium would be quickly absorbed into the ground. But parts of Belarus are drained marshland. The soil here holds cesium in its top layers. It concentrates in certain foods, beloved of Belarusians.
Ходим сами в лес, дети ходят, любят, вообще любят в лес ходить. Часто даже ошас, грибы, что он только что начались, принесли дети, грибы уже насушила.
People go quite some distance to collect mushrooms, and the levels here can be 100 times, for example, what we would consider acceptable in foodstuffs in the United Kingdom, 100 times, which means that eating a relatively small amount of this could give quite a serious amount of cesium.
The problem only affects a few hotspots, but cesium levels in this forest are as high as in the exclusion zone around Chernobyl. Doctors report that some people may be building up radiation doses 300 times higher than from natural background. In this village, people buy milk from private farms. It may also be contaminated with cesium, pushing up their daily dose. In Belarus, there's no law to prevent farmers selling food that's unchecked. The government does take some steps to protect people. Clean food is available in the shops, but few villagers can afford to buy it.
А в магазине что? То, что в магазине тоже это тот самый огород. Вот, например, хозяева выращивают много, они куда сдают ее в магазины. Магазин продает эту продукцию. Чи в магазин куплять, чи в свого огорода, одно то самое. Она одинаковая продукция. Что в магазине, что в своем огороде.
Забери. Женька, найди сюда, садись.
Надо принять во внимание, что цезий накапливается в мышцах. Но он также способен облучать и костный мозг, облучать, так сказать, и другие органы. Поэтому я бы не говорил так прямо, что можно каким-то образом переоценивать эффект цезия. Я думаю, что это еще цезий, радиоактивный цезий, еще проявит себя в большей или меньшей степени.
Gastric problems may be one effect. Doctors are seeing chronic inflammation in children's stomachs and changes in the lining. It could be due to stress, but they suspect contaminated food. They're also seeing cataracts in children. Doctors suspect Chernobyl. This 12-year-old is from an area which was highly contaminated with cesium. Belarus scientists have faith in Keith Baverstock. He devotes much of his time to them, planning research into thyroid cancer at regular meetings in Minsk. They would now like funding to study cesium effects. Once again, they must convince a disbelieving world. But first, they must persuade Keith Baverstock.
Мы не можем сказать о том, что у нас нет цезиевой проблемы. Если нет цезиевой, значит нет и чернобыльской проблемы. Для того, чтобы так сказать, что нет цезиевой проблемы, мы должны это исследовать и доказать, что нет влияния цезия. Мы этого пока сказать не можем.
In order to say that we have no cesium problem, we have to make investigations first, and then to come to the conclusion that there is not such problem.
Мы имеем определенный опыт работы по изучению этого эффекта, влияния радиоцезия на организм. И доктор Баверсток мог сам убедиться в течение последней поездки, как велико заболевание, в частности желудка, частота заболеваний желудка у детей, которые проживают в этом районе.
The cesium problem, I fully recognize, will lead to some cancers. There will be an increase in cancer. But we have to set priorities.
Но нам нужно все-таки выявить какой-то приоритет, первичность.
Because we have few enough resources to do what we know definitely needs to be done.
Baverstock expects there will be new health fallout from Chernobyl, and this is where the first hard evidence will be found. Professor Alexei Okeanov keeps cancer records for the whole of Belarus. 10 years after the accident, he's reporting new developments. There's an increase in cancer in cleanup workers, in lung, bladder and kidney. They are also seeing breast cancer in young women who were living near the reactor.
Вообще, мы не склонны рассматривать ситуацию, что все злокачественные новообразования могут быть связаны с Чернобыльской аварией. Опухоли стали вести себя после аварии, некоторые более агрессивно, некоторые стали более быстро расти. И исходя из того, что частота этого роста стала увеличиваться, и не сразу с 1986 года, а начиная через несколько лет после аварии, когда мог быть этот лаг времени, когда проявилось воздействие радиации, то мы считаем, что возможно имеется такая связь.
The arguments are beginning all over again. So has the West learned anything from the Chernobyl accident? In the light of the Belarus cancers, should we reconsider our own accident plans? In the UK, iodine tablets are available only in certain areas, near nuclear installations. The World Health Organization now feels this is inadequate.
Only a few months ago, we issued new advice, which is that these tablets should be available more or less anywhere in Europe, because we're seeing thyroid cancers occurring now in places 500 kilometers from the accident at Chernobyl. And it's really probably quite difficult to find a place in Europe which is more than 500 kilometers from the nearest nuclear power station.
The NRPB is the nuclear watchdog advising the government on safety. They have not yet responded to the new WHO guideline, though they say it's under discussion.
One really needs to look at the people most at risk and look at all the feasible accidents and come to a balanced judgment as to how many tablets you have available. The government do have strategic reserves of these tablets, and they can be moved fairly quickly to areas in the unlikely event of one of these accidents. But our planning at the moment does not take account of the type of accident, the very severe, almost explosive nature of the Chernobyl accident, which is not considered to be a credible accident in the United Kingdom.
But an accident anywhere in Europe could affect us. Last time, we got off lightly. With the wind in a different direction, we might not be so lucky.
It's desperately important to find out what is actually happening as a result of Chernobyl, because if we are to use nuclear power in the future, we have to balance the benefits against the risks. I think future generations will simply not forgive us if Chernobyl happened and we didn't study it so that we can predict the future consequences of such a disaster and take appropriate precautions, and provide humanitarian assistance to those unfortunate enough to suffer from the consequences of such a disaster.
Our past experience tells us we will have another accident. And I think honesty is extremely important, and I think the honesty with which the scientific community has assessed the consequences of the Chernobyl accident will play a large role in the trust that the public have in the views put to them.
Що їх уже ожидає? Ще я проживу несколько лет, да и слава Богу. Раз уже здоровье подорвано, да що їх уже ожидає впереди?